If you're seeing this, understand it without hesitation and without trying to soften it, because what you're about to hear is not meant to comfort you. It is meant to correct you. And the reason it feels intense is because the timing you are in right now is not neutral. It is not open-ended, and it is not something you can continue to delay without consequence. Because there is a point where waiting is no longer preparation and becomes resistance, and you are standing exactly at that point. You already know this, not as a thought, but as a pressure you have been feeling for a while now. A pressure that doesn't come from outside expectations or other people's opinions, but from within, from that part of you that recognizes when something is being postponed beyond the time it was meant to happen. And that pressure has been increasing, not decreasing, because it is not there to make you comfortable, it is there to move you. This wasn't random, it was selection. There was a moment when you were aligned, when you saw clearly what needed to be done, when you understood the direction without confusion, and at that moment you were supposed to act, not later, not when everything felt perfect, not when you had full certainty, but at that exact point, when clarity was given to you, and you remember it, even if you try not to focus on it, even if you try to tell yourself you needed more time. You didn't lack understanding. You delayed execution. And that delay is what you are feeling now. Because when God places direction in front of someone who is chosen, it is not a suggestion, it is a timing. And that timing is exact, meaning it has a window, not because God is limited, but because alignment requires movement when clarity is present, not when comfort arrives. You weren't confused, you were called. And the call did not disappear. It waited. It gave you space. It allowed you to respond. But it did not change. That direction is still there. That knowing is still there. But now it feels heavier, not because it became more complicated, but because you moved away from the moment you were supposed to move in, and distance from alignment always creates weight. You are not behind in life. You are behind in response. And that is what makes this dangerous, not in a dramatic way, but in a precise way. Because the longer you stay in delay, the more your environment begins to adapt to that delay. The more distractions appear, the more justifications feel valid, the more it seems like waiting is reasonable, even when it is not. You weren't rejected, you were repositioned. But repositioning is not permanent. It is temporary. It exists to give you another chance to respond correctly. And you are still in that window. God is still waiting, but not forever. Because waiting at this level is not endless, it is measured. And once that measure is reached, the path does not disappear, but the ease of stepping into it does. And what could have been entered with clarity becomes something that now requires correction, rebuilding, and unnecessary resistance. You were given a direct path, and you paused, not because you couldn't move, but because you hesitated. And hesitation at this level is not neutral. It shifts timing. This wasn't random, it was selection. The chosen are not allowed to ignore direction without feeling it. Others can delay and feel nothing. Others can avoid and continue as if nothing is wrong. You can't. Because you are not built to drift. You are built to respond. And when you don't respond, everything begins to feel off. Not because your life is falling apart, but because you are out of position relative to where you're supposed to be. That feeling of something being not right. That tension that doesn't go away. That awareness that you are not where you should be. That is not anxiety. That is misalignment. And misalignment is not your natural state, which is why it feels so uncomfortable. You weren't abandoned, you were paused. But pause is not the final state. It is a temporary condition before movement. And you are still in it, right now. Which means you still have the ability to correct this without unnecessary delay. But that requires something most people avoid. Immediate action. Not overthinking. Not planning endlessly. Not waiting for the perfect moment. But responding to what you already know. Because clarity has already been given to you. You are not waiting for more information. You are avoiding what you already understand. And that is what must stop. You didn't miss it, but you are close to. And that is why this message is direct. Because at this level, soft reminders do not move you. Precision does. You are chosen. And what is chosen is not allowed to stay inactive when direction has already been given. You were not meant to sit in this space. You were meant to move through it. And the longer you stay here, the more resistance you will feel. Not as punishment, but as correction. Because your path is not designed to let you remain in delay comfortably. It will continue to push. Continue to pressure. Continue to remind you. Until you respond. Or until the timing shifts in a way that makes the process harder than it needed to be. God is still waiting. But He is not waiting without limit. This is the moment where you stop negotiating with yourself, where you stop justifying delay, where you stop pretending you need more time. Because time is not what you needed. You need it to act. And you still can. Right now. This wasn't random. It was selection. You are not here to consider this. You are here to respond to it. And once you do, the weight lifts. The direction clears. The movement begins. But it only happens after action, not before. You are dangerously late. But you are not too late. That depends on what you do now. You are chosen. And now you are at the point where everything becomes exact. Because once you recognize that the delay was never about lacking ability, never about lacking clarity, and never about circumstances being unfavorable, but entirely about response, then the illusion of needing more time collapses completely. And what remains is a single unavoidable truth. You already know what needs to be done. And the only thing separating you from movement is your willingness to act without negotiating this yourself any longer. This is where the difference becomes visible between those who are called and those who are chosen. Because the called may hear direction and still delay without consequence for a long time. But the chosen cannot sit in that space without feeling increasing pressure, increasing discomfort, increasing misalignment. Because they are not designed to coexist with delay. They are designed to move with precision when clarity is present. And that is why everything inside you has been pushing you forward, while at the same time you have been holding yourself back. This tension is not confusion. It is conflict between alignment and hesitation. And alignment does not adjust to hesitation. It overrides it. This wasn't random. It was selection. You may have noticed that the longer you waited, the heavier everything began to feel. Not necessarily because your external situation changed dramatically, but because your internal state began to shift. Your energy dropped, your focus scattered, your clarity started to blur. And that is not because you are losing direction, but because you are resisting it. And resistance always creates friction, and friction, over time, becomes exhaustion. You are not tired because life is too difficult. You are tired because you are not moving in the direction you already know is yours. And that kind of exhaustion does not go away with rest. It only clears with action. You weren't rejected. You were repositioned. But repositioning was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to give you a moment to see clearly again, to remove distractions, to strip away confusion, to bring you back to the exact point where the decision needed to be made. And you are still at that point now, not because nothing has changed, but because everything has been arranged to bring you back to this exact realization. You do not need another sign. You are the sign. The awareness you have right now, the recognition you feel, the clarity that has returned, that is not something you generated on your own. It is something that has been placed in you again, intentionally, because you are still within the window where response is possible without unnecessary resistance. But that window is not infinite, and you already feel that. That sense that something is closing, not dramatically, not visibly, but internally, like a narrowing of space, a tightening of time, a shift where waiting no longer feels neutral, but begins to feel costly. And that feeling is accurate, because delay at this stage is no longer passive. It is active misalignment. You weren't abandoned. You were paused. But pause is ending. And what comes next is determined by what you do now, not later, not when conditions improve, not when you feel more ready, but in the exact moment where you stop explaining and start executing. Because execution is what restores alignment, not intention, not planning, not understanding, but action. This wasn't random. It was selection. There is no need to complicate this, no need to overanalyze it, no need to break it into smaller parts to make it easier to approach. Because simplicity is exactly what you have been avoiding. You have been trying to expand the process, when in reality it has already been reduced to a single point of movement. And that movement is something you can take immediately, without waiting, without preparing further, without asking for more clarity. You already have enough. You always did. The difference now is that you can no longer pretend you don't. You are not in a position where you need to discover your path. You're in a position where you need to step into it. And stepping into it requires leaving the space you have been staying in, mentally, emotionally, and in some cases physically. Because alignment is not just a thought, it is a position, and position changes through action, not contemplation. You weren't reacting, you were called. And now you are being required to respond. Because the longer you stay where you are, the more you reinforce a version of yourself that hesitates, that delays, that negotiates with clarity. And that version is not the one that is aligned with your purpose. It is the one that keeps you outside of it. You are not meant to stay there. You are meant to move. Immediately. Not recklessly, but decisively. Not emotionally, but precisely. Not with doubt, but with recognition. Because at this point, doubt is not a lack of information. It is avoidance of responsibility. And responsibility is exactly what defines the chosen, not because they are forced into it, but because they recognize when it is time to act, and they do not delay. This wasn't random, it was selection. Everything you have experienced up to this moment has been leading to this exact point. Not to overwhelm you, not to confuse you, but to refine you to a level where the next step is clear enough that it does not require explanation, only execution. And now you are here. Not early, not perfectly on time, but still within reach. You're dangerously late. But you are not too late. That line has not been crossed yet. Which means the next move you make determines everything that follows. Not because it changes your purpose, but because it changes how directly you step into it. You are chosen. And what is chosen does not stay in delay. It responds. Now,